Welcome to Talaterra, a podcast about freelance educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. Who are these educators? What do they do? Join me, and let's find out together. This is your host, Tania Marien. Today, my guest is Dean Waye. Dean is a professional copywriter who helps independent professionals and small business owners and corporations write copy for their respective initiatives. And he also produces webinars as chief copywriter at webinarghostwriter.com. In December, I had the opportunity to participate in a pilot project Dean was conducting. He was developing a new way of working with individuals who wanted to refresh the About section of their LinkedIn profiles. I signed up as a participant because I was curious about how a professional copywriter would write about my project. What my session with Dean revealed is just how stuck I am with using the same sentences, writing the same paragraphs over and over again. And it made me realize that when I write about my project, I only think I'm writing something new in a new way. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dean Waye. In today's episode, Dean and I talk about writing for LinkedIn, how to hold your audience's attention, and how to create online presentations. Let's join the conversation. Dean, thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome. It's fun.
I have to say that the writing session I had with you really made me aware of what I wasn't doing and what I could do more of. The copy you wrote for me goes far beyond being a description. It's an invitation, it's a deeper look at my community, and an accurate snapshot of where my project is right now. What I really appreciate about it is that it's grounded and it feels like me, and it's not spammy marketing copy. And it's because of these two things that I reached out to you after our session. And I thought the independent professionals in my audience would really appreciate learning about what you do and how you do it. And so I would like to begin with, if you could tell me or tell us a little bit about how you became a ghostwriter.
I was approached. I've been a writer for a long time for various things, but I was approached maybe 10 years ago by a collection of professional speakers. And I was in a Toastmasters club with them. And they were having trouble. They were great at what they do. And most professional speakers are quite good at, getting energy from the audience, being on stage, and even like small shifts in sentiment in the audience, they'll pick up on it and, they'll edit or change on the fly for what they're saying. But when they had to move online, especially to webinars, they were having a lot of trouble because once you decoupled the audience reaction mechanism from what you're saying, then it just kind of feels like you're screaming into the void. And you'd be surprised how quickly people sort of crumple a bit when all they can do is, say stuff and they don't get anything back. And so they asked me to help out, especially on the webinar side, to besides helping them write keynote speeches and stuff, but on the webinar side, asking them to dig into how they can improve and do it really well. And I said, I have never done that, so absolutely, let's get going.
Yeah. Now, what amazed me, and I know when we had our session, you had several more after my session. And I've read the copy that you wrote for these other individuals and how thoughtful and how quick a read you are and at capturing each person's individual personality, that it really felt accurate. It felt like, that's them.
Those marathon days were a lot of fun, like 7, 8 people, one right after the other. And like, it's like a creative writing exercise, but then it resets at the top of every hour and you're back into it again. It's definitely helpful to have some questions that take people outside their own mindset and start thinking about themselves from the other person's point of view, from an anonymous reader's point of view. And then the rest of it is just I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of LinkedIn profiles. And LinkedIn profile, the about sections in particular, because I don't help people write out their work history or even their headline really. But the about section on LinkedIn is the only section that's different from every other. Everything else on a LinkedIn page is you talking about you. Your headline is you shouting about you. But the about section is all about your reader. And so that's always an interesting writing exercise when, as a third party, because I'm a third party, I'm not you and I'm not your reader. But as a third party, trying to figure out what your reader is going to want to see or what's going to hook them in on the very first sentence and then draw them into reading, 100 or 150 words, which I think is all anyone ever can reasonably expect to get. Everyone in the world is busy. Nobody goes to LinkedIn. I've got 3 hours to kill. I'm just going to meander around LinkedIn. Like it's not that kind of social platform.
No.
Right? Nobody loses their time. So, oh my God, man, I should have been asleep 2 hours ago. But so I figure you get about 30 seconds. That's about 100 to 150 words, depending on how much you want to push it. And so being able to sort of take the answers of all those questions, then just sort of like percolate for a few minutes in your head. And of course, by that point, these are 1 hour sessions. So I've been listening to you for half an hour. So I should have an idea about your cadence and how you like to approach things, how sort of brash or stand on a soapbox I think you're willing to be. And then from there, after we've talked about your reader and the problems you solve for people, go to the other person's end, the reader's end, and say, okay, well, if this was my problem, what would I want to see for the very first sentence, and then the next sentence, and then the next sentence? It's a super fun experience. Honestly, one of the best things you can do to get out of your own head is write LinkedIn profiles for other people. Everyone should be doing more of it. Everyone should be doing like 10 of those a year. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be an adventure for sure to do that. Because it's true, the about section in LinkedIn, it varies wildly.
Some people really like to shove as much as they can into that section, figuring that I'll just throw everything at the wall and expect that a reader is going to settle in for 5 minutes of their life and read random facts about a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally don't think that works.
My audience is comprised of freelance educators. When I started this project, I sent out a survey and I started talking to people. And what I heard back was a big challenge is visibility and telling our story and presenting ourselves in a way that makes us look different than the next person, the next educator. So I was wondering if you could offer some type of insight to help them become more visible. Because, like I said, after working with you, I just saw just how big of a rut I was in when it comes to writing paragraphs and using the same words over and over and over again.
Well, you'd be shocked how many people, even in marketing, assume that they have to meet their audience or reader halfway. And that the audience will then come to them, pick up what they drop, pick it up, and sort of do the work of internalizing it and stuff. And so you can imagine a continuum, right? From there's you, and then on the other end, there's me or some stranger or some unknown person, right? And let's say that there's like 100 units of X between you and me. And if I go to about 25% or 25 units, basically I'm saying, here, I've done all the research and stuff. Here's my list of materials and references. You can pick it up and it's easier for you than me because you don't have to find all the materials, but here they all are in a list. Go ahead and do your own, read all the books and do your thing, right? And then 50% would be, okay, here's some summaries and some stuff that'll help you sort of frame it and get there all the way. And that's probably as far as most people go, even in marketing. And then but you really need to go at least 90% of the way. You're never going to get to go to 100% of the way, right? 100% is, I'll give you two examples of 100%. All right. 100% or 99% of the way to communicating something is just do it. Or da 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 da, right? The McDonald's thing. Like they've done so much of the communication work out of 100, they've gone to 99, right? To the point where they're basically just conveying an emotion at that point with almost no facts. So, I mean, you need facts. So you need to go about 90% of the way. And it's a lot of work to go from 50%. I'll just drop it here and let someone else pick it up. And if they don't pick it up, it's not for them. To 90%, which is I've done as much as I humanly can to make sure that this is digestible and usable for you as any stranger could do for you. Here's the last 10%. And if you start off thinking, okay, how am I going to get this to 90%? Then even if you only make it to 80 or 75, you've done so much more than anyone who just figures that this is a 50-50 exchange, which it never is. Because unless your audience already knows you, has lots of experience with you, has a really great feeling about you, and trusts you, you can't do 50% because you're just not, no offense, but none of us are important enough to strangers in order to make that assumption. And that's why people don't pick it up. It's like, I posted this, I did a lot of work. This is really interesting stuff. I posted it on Facebook or LinkedIn, or I put it on a website or my blog. And then it was just crickets. And part of the reason it's crickets is because, and I still have this problem all the time, is that you think you've done so much work that I need to ship it at this point. So there's an argument to ship rather than not ship. But there's another argument, even after you ship it, I often go back and say, okay, well, now it's shipped and it's out there. Now it's time to go from 50 to 90. And I go back and start making it. So I'll give you an example. I did the first of a series of webinars yesterday around how to make webinars. And at some point, it needed to ship. And so it shipped on time because I said I was going to ship on a certain day at a certain time, and out it went. But then I spent all day today taking excerpts from it and breaking it down into little tiny digestible parts. And then even though I posted yesterday on LinkedIn and with some folks in my network and stuff, here's the thing, that I said I was going to make. Now I go back and I say, okay, here's an even easier version to digest that makes you want to go and register and watch the full webinar. And it took all day to pull out what's essentially 6 minutes of excerpts and create it into something else. But that's what it takes, right? To get to 90%, I need something that's about 1 minute and 10 seconds long. And someone watches that and they say, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And here's one more that's only 45 seconds long. And then here's a 2 minute one. All right, I got it. I got to watch the rest of this thing because this thing is jam packed full of stuff that I could use.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it took an entire day to make what's essentially the end product is, I think it came out to 4 minutes and 57 seconds worth of content.
Yeah.
The good news is a lot of the stuff we make, it lives forever, right? It's not like, even as a professional speaker, you're only as good as your last speech. And once you deliver it to a live audience, it's kind of done if no one recorded it. Whereas the stuff that, you and I think everyone in your audience is doing, it's much more durable. And so it can make a lot more sense. There was a saying back in old Hollywood, right? Which is like, film lives forever, right? We go ahead and we put in all the money up front to make the movie, and we try to get the very best performance that we can, and we don't skimp on everything, and we don't slack off and say, oh, it's good enough, we don't need to do another take, because film lives forever. And a lot of stuff that we make today, it's very, very durable. And so if it's going to live forever, you might as well put in all of the extra effort up front to make sure that it's worth living forever, because then you just dine out on it for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so right now, that's definitely the case. Yeah, whatever you put on your website in audio, video, it lasts a very long time. In my audience and the communities I move in, we're used to being outside. And and then COVID almost just really knocked the field of environmental education off the rails. And so you've worked with trainers, like train-to-trainer people and all sorts of other people. When your program is a single live event, a presentation, what have you seen that works for the trainers who work that way in person? What type of follow-up have you seen work for trainers?
So their content is basically, it's presented live over and over, and it's not the recording that's valuable. It's live, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's an excellent question, because it very much goes back to, and I was just lucky that I had this experience back with the speakers and the webinars years and years ago, because essentially that's what we all had to do, right? We all had to move online, and in the last year or so. And the biggest hurdle I faced with the speakers is that They didn't want to initially accept that a new medium has new rules and new expectations. And you can't just take, I mean, look at it this way. There are buildings being built today that have like Greek style columns put into them and mansions and stuff. Like these serve no purpose, right? There's nothing about modern construction that requires Greek columns anymore. And yet, every new generation of something tries to like mimic as much of the old generation of it as possible and then just carry it forward. And it's just dumb. And what the speakers would do is, I mean, everyone has heard sort of this advice about slides as an example, right? Don't have more than 6 words on a slide, or, uh, that makes sense if you're live on a stage, because the audience, you are the spectacle, and the slide is just sort of, a photograph or a very short headline that sort of talks about you, and that's it. Whereas when you move online, you have a switch in dynamics. I used to write and create, still do, a lot of presentations, sales presentations for enterprise level, like big B2B, a deal of $1 million is a small sale kind of thing for those kind of teams. And what I would write for them for webinars or for WebExes or Zooms is very different than what I would write for them live. And what you can do live versus what you can in person in a little conference room, even, there might only be 8 people in this conference room. But sure enough, the most senior person, and if whenever you're trying to like quote unquote sell or persuade anything, right? There's a few things in a live meeting, in a little conference room that you can always be sure of. One is that the senior decision maker is often or usually the oldest person in the room. They often walk in late just to show that they can. They sit furthest away from the screen where your slide is. And so there are considerations around that where you can't put a lot of like tiny stuff on a screen, because they literally won't see it and they'll just tune out and you may have lost their attention and have to get it back. Now, there's one example. We're in a situation where you might be further away from the senior decision maker than you've ever been before, hundreds or thousands of miles. But that person is now only 18 inches from a screen. So you can, and I never would have advised this before, you can put a lot more on a screen than you ever could before, because literally everybody can read it. The only thing I tell people is build up, don't throw up, right? You can put a lot on a screen, but it's a little bit at a time, and then you add a little bit more, and then you add a little bit more. You do not throw up 400 words or a super complex diagram.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is it's a different medium, and it has different rules. Different rules for audience attention, different rules for content, different rules for how you follow up later. And if you just try to take the old style of what you were doing before, like live presentations in a small room or a large room, and then apply it to this, it doesn't work. And then you end up with really crazy advice. I went through this whole thing. There's a group called the Sales Enablement Society, and there's someone there who posted like a whole big, God bless them, slew of tools, right, about online presentations. And I said, well, this is kind of my field. I'm going to dig into this. One of the things they recommend is every few minutes you stop and interrupt the flow to ask the audience if they have any questions. Do they have any comments? And on the face of it, that seems like a really good idea, except that idea came directly from direct advertising, of constantly interrupting people to get their attention. And all it does is it shuts down people's attention. And that's, again, they're not willing to put in enough work up front. They're not willing to go 90% and make sure that everything they say is practiced and crafted enough so that the audience sort of comes along for the narrative. And from the very beginning, you're giving the impression your attention is in good hands with me. I know what I'm doing. Instead, they're going 50-50 and then just like throwing tennis balls at the audience to hit them in the forehead and say, hey, wake up. I'm still talking here. And I mean, this is a silliness. But again, it's old style stuff applied to a new medium, and it never works. But I mean, eventually we are going to become super great at this video conferencing stuff. It'll be, I mean, there was a time when people had trouble learning how to use a smartphone. And now, of course, everybody knows how to use it. And, we will eventually, as a worldwide society, become super, super great at this. But we sure are not there yet. We're still putting up Greek columns and wanting people to be impressed by Greek columns.
Yeah. And I think a technique like that of asking questions every few minutes, I think after a couple of times, it's clear it just becomes an impossible or unwieldy type task because people, if it's a large crowd on a, say, a Zoom call, they are spread over several pages and they're either paying attention or not.
Zoom has different challenges as well. I'll give you an example. It used to be you could be in the audience looking at a speaker on stage, or you could be, in a little conference room while someone was giving a presentation for 7 people. And if you had a quick question or something, you could just sort of lean over to the person next to you and whisper like, okay, what page are we on now? Or what topic is this? Or has she already covered such and such, right? You can't have, but at the whole time, I would have been paying attention, like half paying attention to what was being said. I was looking at the speaker. I was looking at the projection on the wall. You can't do that actually in Zoom. Like there are no side conversations where you can maintain partial attention because it's all text-based. So any sort of side chat I want to have with anyone, I'm usually looking either at a different screen or at the same screen, but I'm focused on a different part of it. I'm not paying attention at all when I'm typing, and then I'm waiting for the response to come, and then I'm reading the response. And so oddly enough, by making it harder for audiences to shift their attention away from us slightly, we've made it almost mandatory that they shift their attention away from us completely in order to do that kind of stuff. One of the many little quirks about online and video-based meetings and presentations that we now have to just deal with somehow. I don't think that live conferences are ever going to come back in the level that they did before. Right? There's been a lot of growing pains. People suffered, a lot of stuff got canceled, and other things they didn't. The business model now changes, right? So, but on the one hand, it's going to be really hard to charge $4,500 for a 3-day conference if people can attend virtually. On the other hand, you can charge $2,500 and sell 4 times or 10 times or 20 times as many, because scaling up, right, is a lot cheaper in the virtual world than scaling up in the physical world. So I think the business model around that stuff is going to change.
I think there'll be a lot of hybrid events moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, because last year and with lots of other people I was able to attend events that I wouldn't have never made it to.
Yeah,
With
me
travel
too.
and all that.
I never want to get on a plane again.
Yeah.
I'm just fine, thank you very much. My days of taking 130, 150 flights a year are over, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's a lot of flying. Based on your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that trainers make? I'm going to focus on trainers, teachers who have a teaching role wherever they work. What are some common mistakes that they make in writing copy and also in presenting that you've seen over the many years that you've worked with trainers in this way?
Okay, I'll give you an example. I do a lot of work. A lot of my webinar writing work is for tech companies, software companies, and fintech, healthcare, that kind of stuff. And the presenter is a technical expert, not a paid speaker, not a professional, doesn't give a lot of presentations, doesn't make a lot of presentations, has never really had to care about audience attention. And one of the biggest challenges I have with them initially is to convince them that not only should they, but they can take almost every technical concept that they have and reduce it down to a 4th grade reading level. And that's sort of the magic number, is 4th grade, 5th grade. And they tend to have 2 initial objections around that. One is if I boil down and simplify and compress my text or what I'm going to say, even in a script, down to that level, that, well, first of all, it can't be done. It can't be done. I've got 25 years of experience and 3 PhDs, and it cannot be done. And then I don't let them go on that one. It absolutely can be done. Maybe we'll go to grade level 5 or 6, but we're not going to go above 7. But then the second objection is, well, people don't like to say this out loud, but it's easy enough in the way they dance around the subject. They're going to think I'm not as smart as they should think I am, because I convey everything in this simple language. And I wish I had better stats around this, but I can tell you from many, many years of experience in writing for other people and technical experts, is that the audience's opinion of your depth of knowledge and understanding actually goes up the simpler your language is. It doesn't go down. It goes up. And that's a consistent, I've never had a single audience that I've polled after the fact where they said, yeah, he didn't really seem to know what he was doing. No. If you can boil it down to that simple construct, then everyone says like, wow, like that dude really knows what he's talking about. And I'm smarter too, because I fully understood it. Right. But again, it's the 90% rule, right? No, I'm going to leave it in my regular technical knowledge, and then they should understand enough about my field so that they can just pick it up and internalize it from there. But I mean, there's no downside to simplifying it and simplifying it and simplifying it, right? You can always provide a PDF with references and technical data and stuff afterwards, but there's no downside to simplifying it to the simplest possible level where your meaning and intention are still conveyed. You won't go wrong, right? You won't. And I have this argument so many times, and I'm always right because you can't go wrong with it. You can't. You'll do great. People will love it. People will say, wow, like that's amazing. That guy's a genius. Like she's the smartest person I've ever had. She's the first person who understood it so well that when she explained it, I finally understood it. And we've had 9 other people in that field come in over the last 7 years and give us a presentation like this. And she's the first one that I actually understood why we need to do this.
Yeah.
That's what you get when you're willing to boil it down to grade 4, grade 5.
Mm-hmm. And the people who you've worked with, did they see that after the fact? Did they come
Oh
to
yeah,
that?
every one of them. It's like, and that content will live forever, right? Those webinars, those presentations can live forever. They record them. They use them as training videos for new people who they onboard. There's no downside to it. The problem is people don't want to put in the work ahead of time. They feel like there's a somewhat a level of entitlement. Hey, this is not my job to simplify this stuff for an audience. My job is to make this or invent this or improve X, right?
Yeah.
So it's not my job. And B, I shouldn't have to do it. I came from the world of software, right? And there's an old saying in software that thank God got killed. But we used to say about software, if it's hard to make, it should be hard to use, right? That's insane. That's an insane concept. But people carry forward this sort of same kind of idea about their own work. I've read 10 million words on this topic. How can I possibly, and why should I have to boil this down to 17 minutes of something that a 4th grader could read?
Yeah, no, I can understand that, relate to that. Because when I've gone to professors' talks about their project or whatever, I always cringe when they get to the slide with the variables, the slide that makes them say where X equals this, where M equals mutation, where mu equals that, whatever. And then they go through all the variables and what they mean. It's like, oh, that it always makes me cringe because it seems to me that if they could tell their story without that one slide, which turns everything into a math problem, that would be helpful.
I mean, all of that stuff is inside baseball, right? But let's face it, even most people who like watching baseball aren't willing to sit down for 4 hours of inside baseball talk.
Yeah.
Or someone talking at them about inside baseball. Right? It's just not that interesting. And I've got so many things in my life to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And so, come on. Of course, maybe we're just all getting lazier with our attention. But again, that's, I don't know if you, the number of words that the average person knows is quite a bit smaller. Like the number is quite a bit smaller than it was 100 years ago. And a lot of that is blamed on like TV and movies to start off, right? And but to be honest, most of those words, especially, I mean, we're talking about English here. Most English words are just synonyms of other words. You can go to thesaurus.com, type in almost anything, and find 10 to 25 synonyms for the same word. So some of those are just old, and some of those you're using just because it makes you feel good and makes you feel smart to write them. But we lose something by not having as broad a range of words that we commonly see and use every day. But I mean, I wouldn't give up movies just so that the average person knew an extra 300 or 400 words, right? You get more for everything that comes along, and there's always a cost. And so thinking, okay, well, I shouldn't have to simplify what I'm saying in a way that this audience would understand it makes no sense. Because otherwise, why did you do all the work? Why bother to put together the presentation in the first place if if it's not understandable, A, but B, if it's so inside baseball, the audience isn't going to pay attention to it. Because if the audience isn't paying attention to it, everything you did was a waste of time. You should have sent them an email. Because I mean, why? If it's all about the audience and their attention. Otherwise, why have an audience?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The audience doesn't owe you anything. They don't even owe you their attention other than the first couple of minutes when you get started, which most people waste at the beginning of a talk.
And how do they waste them?
Oh my God, there's so many ways. So essentially, at the beginning of a presentation, a Zoom meeting, a webinar, all this kind of stuff, there's a concept called costly signaling, right? It's an evolutionary concept. That's why peacocks have these beautiful, plumage and all this kind of stuff. It shows I'm so successful and worth your attention that I waste resources in order to grow this or do this or be like this or drive this car or whatever, right? I deliberately waste resources in order to impress. What people do so often, the opposite of that in a talk. So, I mean, I did spend a lot of time in Toastmasters. One of the things Toastmasters will tell you, but they do not understand anything about costly signaling, is they'll tell you when you start your speech, don't start by saying how nervous you are. Don't apologize to the audience because your voice is raspy or that you seemed rushed because you got caught in traffic. Just like start your speech. And they don't explain why. Their explanation is, well, the audience is there to listen to you, so the other stuff is just extra. But that's not really what's happening. What's happening is apologizing up front. I was in the audience for a webinar a few months ago where the speaker started off by saying that he'd had the flu for the last few days. Now, I mean, the flu doesn't make you raspy or cough, right? If he hadn't said that, literally no one would have ever known, could ever have known. Why did he say that? He said it because he wanted to help humanize himself and also he wanted to use cheap signaling, right? He wanted to say, like, don't set a high bar for me and this experience because I was recently sick. And that's one of the worst. That's how you waste the first 3 or 4 minutes of audience attention time, is you decide what you should be always conveying at the beginning of your talk is, first, you're in the right place at the right time. Because obviously some of us have a lot of meetings to go to. We don't want to be 5 minutes late for the next one because we weren't paying attention and all of a sudden we're not in the right one and we need to go cut out and go somewhere else. And that's happened to everybody. But then you play against yourself and the need for costly signaling with an audience. An audience needs to have conveyed to them at the very beginning, settle in. This is going to be super cool. I know what I'm doing. I'm not futzing around. I don't have to pause every 3 sentences in order to gather my thoughts because I haven't practiced this. I always advise people that I help doing for webinars and stuff is what's called, and we've all been through this, right, is improv. So improv is where someone is putting together, like you're putting together a conference or you're sort of a host or you've got a team and someone's going to give a part of the presentation, right? So you say, okay, so let's like let's like look at what we're going to tell them tomorrow. And then this person fires it up. And on slide 1, he doesn't pretend you're the audience and say, one of the main things we're going to talk about today is blah. No, he doesn't say that. He fires up slide 1 and he says, so on this slide, I'm going to tell them about X. And then he goes to slide 2. And on this slide, I'm going to tell them about Y and Z, right? And he has not thought through what he's going to say. He hasn't rehearsed it at all. That's improv. That's how meetings go over. And that's one of the ways that we undercut costly signaling and audience attention. At the beginning and all the way through any presentation is where if we haven't rehearsed what we're going to say, especially I tell people, if you're not going to rehearse any or memorize anything else, at least rehearse and memorize the first 5 minutes. Enough time so that it's smooth, it sounds natural, you're just going into it. By the way, one of the easiest ways to sound smooth and natural and not trip up is to write it for yourself at a 4th grade level. Just like, it all ties together. But that's one of the ways that we waste and turn away audiences in the first few minutes, is that we fail to give them the impression that we know what the hell we're doing and that their attention is in good hands, that we're not going to be a waste of time. So don't apologize. Don't say, I'm so sorry, that feel a bit raspy, or boy, hard night last night. Really had trouble. Or can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? There's someone in the chat who didn't say yet that they could hear me, even though the other 9 people did. Is everything going okay over there? That's not what we're there for, right? We're investing our attention and time. And we want to know within the first, let's say it's going to be an hour long, within the first 5 and no more than 10 minutes, that our investment in you is worthwhile. And so more than anything else, practice the first 5 or 10 minutes. Have it down so pat that you're sick of hearing yourself say it, because the audience isn't sick. They're never going to hear it more than once. But don't, right? Costly signaling is very important in all presentations, but especially in the first 5 or 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. I would have to say that having a good about statement that someone else besides you wrote for you will really do wonders, because I've received positive feedback from the statement that you wrote. And it's also done wonders for myself as well, to see my project in a different light, from a very different perspective.
I was just going to say, as smart as I feel at being so good at writing those things, it wasn't until last week that someone pointed out something so obvious to me about that first, 100 or 150 words, which is that you can literally lift it. It's the same text. You can use it on as the sort of summary of yourself on a resume.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there was one other place they told me you could use it too. And it said, like, I literally just copy pasted it. It's better than what I had before, and it reads great. And how did it never occur to me that it's the same text, just in a slightly different, context or medium?
Mm-hmm.
So even I don't fully understand, all the ways to use this stuff. But I mean, resumes are very much like that, right? I mean, a resume's job is to just get you an interview. Nobody gets hired without the interview just because their resume was so good. Mm-hmm. So its job is a bridge to get you to one place to another. And your LinkedIn about section is the same thing. It's just get someone to take the next tiny little step and agree to talk to you or connect with you or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's all about the costly signaling, which basically just means you're investing to make sure that the audience has a good time and feels comfortable investing a little bit of time with you in order to read or listen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And by being clear and, like I said, what you wrote, it feels like me. It feels grounded. And so I'm comfortable moving forward, having conversations with anyone who might reach out, because it's...
now you have your elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dean, so much for stopping by today and
it's
for your
always
time.
Nice to talk to you.
Well, thank you. To find out how you can learn more from Dean, visit the show notes for this episode at Talaterra.com. Here you will find a link to Dean's website. The link will take you to a video where you will learn more about preparing online presentations. When you register for the video, and registration is free, Dean will send you additional resources that you can use to prepare your own presentations. I hope you found today's episode informative and that you find Dean's resources helpful as you prepare presentations for your programs this year. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more about business practices from content experts like Dean, please let me know your interests. You can send me a message through the contact page on the website. Talaterra is a podcast for and about independent educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Tania Marien.